Hello everyone, this is Elias Martin of CollectingJapanesePrints.com. Welcome to Woodblock Wednesday, where on Wednesdays we get together and discuss Japanese prints, paintings, history, and culture. It's been a couple of weeks since we last got together. I missed the last two Woodblock Wednesdays because I was doing some traveling, and now I'm back and I'm getting ready to do an exhibition, my latest exhibition, on the website. So that is something to look forward to. But today I thought I'd bring out a really interesting comparison. I always like to show more than one print on our Woodblock Wednesday because I think, with prints being multiples and just being involved with such a rich tradition in Japanese printmaking, it's wonderful to be able to see different impressions and different types of prints and compare them. And today we're discussing one of the most important 20th century printmakers that comes from Japan. His name is Koshiro Onchi, and he happens to be one of my favorite print artists. He is a Sosaku Hanga print artist, and Onchi was really one of the main, founders. I could call him a founding member of the Sosaku Hanga sort of genre. Though Yamamoto Kanae is credited with starting the tradition, it was Onchi that continued the tradition through the 30s into the war years and after the war. And Onchi is also credited with creating the first work of abstraction in Japan in 1915. And being so early in Japanese art history, abstraction was not understood by the Japanese public. And Onchi, though he didn't create abstraction. I mean, there were others in Europe who sort of were working in that form of expression. Onchi was influenced by the Europeans, by the avant-garde artists working in Europe, but he brought his own flavor, his own influences to abstraction, and he created some fantastic work. And so today's Woodblock Wednesday features a late period print by Onchi, done in 1954, his most important year. One can argue that. And it was the year right before he died. He was terribly ill the last year, 1955, and so he did not create any artwork in that year. I would imagine he almost felt that was sort of in the cards for him, and so 1954 was a very, very busy year for Onchi and produced some of his most iconic works. And so today we have two impressions of the same design, one by Onchi himself and one by his son. And so without further ado, let's go to the table and have a look. So I'm going to step back so that you could see these two works. We'll start with this one, but let me just finalize a little bit more of the introduction. So, as I mentioned, Onchi was one of Japan's most fervent supporters for Sosaku Hanga. And for those of you who are new to the channel and are not familiar with Onchi or Sosaku Hanga artists were very interested in producing self-directed work. They produced the wood blocks themselves. They produced the designs that carved out the blocks and printed the work all individually on their own independently. In the early years, most Sosaku Hanga artists were not professional artists. They had other jobs like Onchi, but then produced woodblock prints as amateurs in the truest sense of the word. They loved making prints and they loved being able to express themselves and imbue their prints with their own psychological and emotional characteristics of what they were experiencing at the time. And so Onchi was one of those artists who advocated for expression and emotional, psychological qualities being evident in his work, really showcase his influence in other artists as well. So, I mean, he was the main artist really advocating for individual expression in their prints. And if we put that in the greater context of Japanese art or Japanese art history, that's actually really novel. Japanese artists, well, technically speaking, there wasn't even a word for an artist in Japan until the 20th century. It was artisan. And so what a Japanese print artist had to say was really of no concern for hundreds of years. It was really the publisher that was calling the shots and hired the print artists to produce a very specific design in order to be, in order to be successful for the publisher and create a really wonderful source of income for them. Of course, artists like Hokusai and Hiroshige certainly were famous and had their ability to influence what the publisher may have wanted. But at the end of the day, it was the publisher calling the shots. And that continued into the 20th century, with Watanabe being such a prominent publisher of Hanga. But on the other side of that coin were the Sosaku Hanga artists producing work that was self-directed and work that was really produced to satisfy their own interests. And Onchi was one of those artists that said it's about self-discovery, it's about an emotional expression of the artist. And so what we have here is a really wonderful example. This design, and I'm going to move over because I should focus on the Onchi printed impression first. But this design was done in 1954. It's called, let me get the technical, let me get the book out here. I think because they're all numbered. So okay, this one is in the book. It's object number 3. I didn't want to give you the wrong title. So object number 3, it's part of a 4-print series, and the main theme of the series is that all of the prints in this series were produced with found objects, particularly the wood taken, or the wood used in these designs was taken from wood that was reclaimed from his daughter's home after some, I think they remodeled her home, some restoration, remodeling of her home, and there was wood that was harvested from the remodeling. And so Onchi took that wood and fashioned printing blocks into wonderful compositions, and this is one of them. This is object number 3. And what we have here, I mean, you could see these wonderful shapes. There's a circle here. Then there's these rectangles and squares arranged by texture, by color. And what we have here is, kind of a study of texture, color, as well as how color interacts with the other pigments that are printed below. So for example, there's this mustard sort of yellow block that comes down, and then there's a brown coloration here that's been applied over it, which creates a wonderful sense of texture. The surface is really rich with pigment, but also it creates depth. There's a really interesting and wonderful sense of depth in this impression. And we could discuss that when we look at a later printing by his son and how that is quite different. But also what we have here, this piece of wood, it's irregularly shaped, and it's also printed in a way where the pigment shows the wood grain that's in the block of wood, but it also is printed in a way where it's interacting with the block underneath here, and you see this really interesting area. It's kind of hard to capture on the phone. I'm looking at the image on the phone, and it looks a little bit more flat than it looks in person. In person, this impression radiates. The colors are so richly applied, but they're also sort of loosely applied, and they sort of interact with each other and the surface of the paper. Well, one thing I would want to mention about this that's kind of hard to grasp on the video is the surface of this print is just stunning. It's very active. And the idea of surface on a work of art, it's a mid to late 20th century sort of idea. It was the abstract expressionists in the US that were really interested in creating a wonderful active surface on the on the surface of the canvas. And Onchi understood this. He understood this a long time before those artists were active. And he was printing in a way where the pigment rested on the surface of the paper and it added depth and also sort of an emotional depth to the print, which I find really fascinating. The other thing I want to point out that may not be as evident is the background is actually printed with a silver mica. It's actually really thinly applied, and I've never seen mica applied so thinly before. But I think what Onchi was trying to do is add some sheen to the paper, but not to lose the texture of the paper, which is really interesting. And if you look, the paper has this really wonderful texture throughout, which echoes the surface of the printing blocks as well. So, though the design looks somewhat simplistic, some might argue at first blush, when we investigate this print and we start looking at it carefully, we see all these wonderful aspects that the print has that Onchi was very, very careful to create and add to his print. And again, I want to show the surface and how active it is. Yeah, so I'm gonna try to zoom in so you could also see the mica, where the mica ends and the paper, the unprinted portion of the paper begins, which is kind of interesting. And it's kind of irregular because the paper is not completely square, which adds to the character of this print. The whole print has this very organic quality to it, echoing the natural qualities of the paper. Of the wood blocks used to print the design. But the paper, obviously being handmade, but also slightly irregular with these interesting sort of the texture of the paper is such that it adds quite a bit to the printing. Now this print is quite rare. It's only known in 2 to 3 impressions. So it's extraordinarily rare. And I'm very fortunate to own a self-printed impression by Onchi. Like I said, only a couple museums in the world have this design, and of course they're all very different. I should show in the book, if you could see, it's printed in the copy in the book. It's printed a little differently. The colors are a little different. This one looks a little bit flatter, but again, you can't tell because it's photography, and they shot the print and then published it into this book, and a lot could be lost, particularly with Onchi prints. But I do want to show the difference between this impression and this impression. And again, this was done in 1954, Onchi's most significant year in his career, as I would argue it, because so many of these important monoprints or rare prints done in 2 or 3 impressions were produced in that year, and these compositions, mostly abstract. In fact, I think 1954 was pretty much exclusively just work that he produced in abstraction. They're all fantastic. This work is done by Kunio Onchi, Onchi's son, And he produced this in the 1980s. And over the years, museums and collectors were approaching Kunio to produce a small edition of some of his father's prints, because in Japan, most of the museums did not have any Onchi prints. And the museums really wanted to have work by Onchi represented in their collections. Most of those prints ended up in the West. They ended up in the Michener collection. They ended up with Statler and other collectors, a few based in Chicago. And those prints ended up at the Art Institute or at the Honolulu Academy of Arts. And then there was another collection that ended up at the British Museum. But the Japanese museums didn't have many examples by Onchi, and so Kunio Onchi went out and obtained paper and pigments that would be suitable to produce his woodblock prints that were prints that his father produced. And here we have his signature Kunio Onchi. It says printed by Kunio Onchi. That's embossed into the paper itself. And I'll show you the label on the back. But I wanted to show this print in the beginning and then contrast it to this and come back to it, because we could see, though the design's the same, the effect is so different. What we have here, obviously, it's the same blocks that were used to print the design. And the coloration is similar. In fact, this coloration is more closely associated with this impression than with the one I have here. But what we have here is inadequate printing. I think Kunio Onchi did a great job at producing a design that I think faithfully captures the essence of his father's work. But it's not his father's work. And what we're missing is Onchi's sense of texture and softness in the printing. Here we have this printing block. It's much more rigid in the way that it's printed. The red is very consistent. Also, I would assume there's some wear on the blocks, and so what we have here is the printing is not as nicely done. But in this print we have here, we almost get the sense of the block of wood is resting on the surface of this print. It's much more well articulated, but the printing itself is more complicated. It's soft in areas, it's richer in other areas, and here it's pretty flat. And that is pretty much the metaphor we could use throughout the print itself. This background block is fascinating because you could see the wood grain, but it's, again, printed with such a uniformed hand, whereas Onchi's original printing, it's much more subtle. It's sophisticated, it's playful, it's emotional, it's psychological. And it's funny what you could add more descriptions to his printing, but and it's funny because it looks so simple, but when you're in front of this print, all of those things sort of unfold. In here, again, though it's a nice design, and he did a great job of capturing the wood grain of each block, it doesn't have that spirit or the essence that Onchi brings to his work. So I'm going to zoom in so you can look at the print. This impression actually reminds me of the work by Gen Yamaguchi, who was a disciple of Onchi's and produced his own body of work that I think was quite influenced by Onchi. Both Yamaguchi and Onchi claim that they both arrived at printing abstraction with found objects at the same time. And I could see how that's possible. But, with Gen Yamaguchi's work, a lot like Kunio's Onchi's impression of this, it's more conceptual, it's less emotional, and in Onchi's work, it's amazing. These are the same blocks, but the valuation of how thickly applied the pigment is on the surface is so sophisticated, so subtle in the printing here. And there's so much, let me see if I could almost angle this. I could almost see, I think I could show how the pigment it's actually resting on the surface of the paper. And this has a strong, like, painterly quality to it, which you see pretty much on most, if not all, self-printed Onchi impressions. They do look like paintings, and which is fantastic. So again, this design, though it's simple, it's quite elegant, it's quite emotional and psychological. Whereas Kunio Onchi's impression, it does a good job at showcasing the design, but it falls a little flat, in my opinion, especially when you have it right next to the original. Now, I want to show a few other things about this print. So for the connoisseurs out there that come across Kunio prints or Kunio printed impressions, most of them come with labels. And this label has the title of the work, object number 3. It's indicated here that it's by Koshiro Onchi, his father. But here it says printed by, and then he indicated it's a recreated original. And he did this in an edition of 20, and this is number 2 of the 20 that he produced. So, which is kind of interesting. That label is modeled after an Onchi label that he would often use for some of his impressions, and I have that label on some of my prints, but Onchi wasn't very consistent, and he didn't apply that label to all of his prints, particularly if those prints weren't sold directly to Westerners. In this impression, the market was the West, but it also was these museums in Japan that wanted examples of his father's work. So I'm going to go across the surface of both prints one last time so you could see the difference in the printing. Oh, and I'll point out that this Onzi stamp is hand applied, and you see it here on the original, and it has been applied by Kunio pretty much exactly where his father stamped it on his print. Slightly lower, it's a little higher. You can tell that it's not part of the block. It's actually a stamp. Okay, one last time on this original. I should also point out that on Kunio's print, it lacks the very thin application of mica, which gives the original, as I said, a wonderful sense of depth, maybe also a sense of light, as light reflects off the surface, the background. It also, it helps animate the composition and bring the objects forward even more. I mean, if I didn't say this already, this has a very strong three-dimensional quality to it. And I'll just try to angle it. You can see the edge. And since I showed you the back of that print, I'll show you the back of this print. It's very active. You could see how the independent blocks were printed. And before we go, I just want to point out, this is the series where the print belongs. This is object number 3. This is object number 4. This is object number 1 and object number 2. I have shown these 3 in other presentations I've done online. And so if you're interested in learning more, I did a seminar about Onchi and his circle. You could look it up on YouTube and enjoy it. Yeah. But in this case, I wanted to present this work, which I just recently acquired, because it serves to be a really wonderful comparison to the original work. And as things go, these Kunia Onchi prints are also pretty rare. So since a lot of them ended up in institutions in Japan, only a handful were sold. And so, when you see them, if you're lucky to have the original, they make a great pair. And so this book, by the way, is the latest catalog on Onchi's work. Was produced by a museum in Japan for the 2016 retrospective on Onchi. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me on this week's installment of Woodblock Wednesday, where we were able to look at two Onchi impressions, one by Onchi's son Kunio and the original by Onchi himself. I hope you enjoyed the comparison, and I'm currently working on our latest exhibition. It will go up in a couple weeks. It's something to look forward to. There's some really wonderful Sosaku Hanga, but also important Shin Hanga prints that will be going up online. So please have a look. But also, you want to sign up for my website emails so that you'll be one of the first to learn about my exhibitions and other events. So go to my website. If you haven't signed up for the email list before, go to collectingjapaneseprints.com, and under the contact section, you could easily subscribe to the email list. And of course, on the website, we have a wonderful array of ukiyo-e, Shin Hanga, Sosaku Hanga, and contemporary prints. We also have a bookstore full of rare and out-of-print reference books on Japanese prints and paintings. So I encourage all of you to have a look. And if you're interested in learning more about prints, I've done a large series of videos. I mean, what we have here is over 100 Woodblock Wednesdays that are archived on YouTube, as well as quarterly seminars that I produce. So there's quite a bit of free content available on Japanese prints and paintings, so please have a look. They're all listed on our website and as well as archived on YouTube. So thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing all of you next week on Woodblock Wednesday. Until then, thank you.